Hey everyone, just wanted to give you a heads up that we split this episode up into two parts, and the second part will come out later this week. We did that because this episode was a little longer than what we had planned, and also we're trying to cut back on how long our episodes are in general. So, with that being said, we hope you enjoy. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the PB&J podcast. And today we're doing something a little different. We are going to be having a discussion style debate, or I guess debate style discussion. I don't know. But the topic, which the thesis that I'm proposing, because I was the one that sort of brought it up, was that American churches overwhelmingly favor what they consider to be a New Testament form of evangelism. But given the cultural shift of the last 20 to 30 years, we really should be using an Old Testament style of evangelism. So that's the idea, that American churches favor too much what they feel the New Testament form of evangelism is. And I disagree. I think churches should be looking at the Old Testament for how we should be doing evangelism. So, I mean, wow, we're right into the topic. So there it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Uh,
So I
yeah.
guess, and
Do you want me to
go ahead.
unpack that a little
No,
bit,
you're
or do you
good.
just want to go ahead and start your response?
Well, no, let me just say my beginning point, my beginning thing.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not even a response. It's just like I'm just going to tell you what I plan on doing, so it's easier to follow along for the listeners. But also, Ben, because like we used to do this at dinner at Olivet, so uh,
Yeah.
and both of us were always really good if we did have a discussion like this to like let it know like this is how I'm trying to get there. This is what I'm trying to do. What I'm going to try to do is say that I don't think you're interpreting the New Testament correctly, so I'm going to try to tear down that assumption. Maybe
Okay.
successfully, maybe not, and then I'm going to try to build in its place a proper understanding and see what the difference is based on my understanding and historical research of the early New Testament, but also of 21st century for us in particular America, but we'll broaden it out to say the West.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
anyway,
Uh,
go ahead and
no,
unpack
that's
it
fine.
though.
So I guess my approach is going to be somewhat similar. I'll sort of explain how churches view the New Testament form of evangelism, and I'm saying this from the perspective of a pastor. So, like, I've been like in meetings where people are like, "All right, this is how we need to approach evangelism," essentially. So I'll explain what that looks like, and I'll kind of deconstruct that a little bit myself and
Okay.
uh, sort of and or maybe I'll focus more on constructing what the Old Testament style is and maybe do a
Okay.
argue in favor of that. So
So counter
we'll
my
just see
counter.
how it goes. Maybe,
All right.
maybe.
Well, we'll see
You
how
know,
it goes.
I'll just
This is a
explain it.
little new for us to be this organized. So yeah.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Sorry.
So
I'm excited.
yeah, so I'm sure if you're listening to this or watching it on YouTube, you're probably familiar with what I'm going to describe as what evangelism is. In fact, when we say evangelism, you might already have an idea of this. So think Billy Graham, right? Like big, sort
Mm.
of maybe not big in terms of like number of people, but like a moment that is supposed to lead to a decision, like a big revival type form of evangelism. You get people together, you orate, you explain, you use verbal language to communicate the gospel message, almost in a salesman style, like, hey, here's how your life is messed up, and here's Jesus Christ. He can make it better if you accept him into your life.
It's the world's best
For
sales conference.
yeah, for one easy payment of
Sorry.
repentance, uh, and yeah, uh, and then you get people to convert, and then that's
For
what
your
evangelism
finite
looks
life,
like.
you could have eternal life.
Yeah. So when we look at
Okay.
the New
Okay.
Testament, that seems to be a part of what the New Testament talks about. Like you have, in the book of Acts, you have Paul and other of the apostles going to places. What do? They talk to people. They go to like the town square or wherever, or the temple. In Paul's case, that's usually where he went. He would give an argument for the faith, the sort of apologetics, and then people would begin to believe. And so churches nowadays, we look at that and we say, hey, it worked for Paul, then that's the way we need to do it. And so a lot of our evangelistic efforts are focused on how do we get people either into the church to hear the pastor give a good message that's going to have a responsive time so we can fill up these altars that never get used anyways, and then we can, grow our numbers or whatever, or we can find a place out there in the public where we can go and we can preach, and hopefully people will come to know Christ that way, because that's how the early church did it, so that's how we should do it too. So that is a model of evangelism that a lot of American churches, again, look at. I think that's a model that doesn't work in our culture. So I
Hmm.
think that we need to look at what the Old Testament does in terms of evangelism and build off of that. But maybe I should pause there. Uh,
No, no.
and if you want to give a response to it, you want me to keep going?
Not at all. Because I think it's best to take it all on kind of in bulk, and not in a bad way, like just so we can kind of piecemeal it. But it also allows us to have those like little discussion and nuances for each point you're making. Could I just
Yeah.
ask you a question though? Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Why do you think it doesn't work? And maybe that'll lead you into your Old Testament alternative. But like, I want to know that specifically, or if you could lay out a reason why you think that,
Yeah.
or reasons.
I think the reason it doesn't work is somewhat demonstrated in the fact that churches in America are shrinking
Mm,
and not growing. And the fact that this is still a model that we tend to gravitate towards and we tend to promote shows, okay, it's obviously not working. Like, it just doesn't work. You can't just get people together, have 30 minutes to 3 hours, somewhere in that span of time, and have that be a time where people are going to be either through argument or through, emotional, uh, I don't want to say emotional manipulation because that's not what it is, but they're appealing to emotion or appealing to logic or whatever. They're going to convince them to convert and totally buy into, yes, I need to be a Christian. I just don't think that's viable, especially in our culture, which has become incredibly cynical. So whenever we hear things like that, I think our initial reaction is to be like, either that we disagree or we say, I need to think about this a little bit more. Maybe I don't buy
what
in
are you
right away,
selling me?
unless
Yeah,
you're already, yeah, unless you're
yeah.
already inclined to do that. I just don't see that as effective. And this is coming from someone who, like, I've done that, like, in a community where people knew what Christianity was, like, they weren't foreign to the concept. Some people were, just because they hadn't been connected to the church at all. And I've done services where I've had people in the church that were not Christian, and you do the altar call thing, and I have to say, as a pastor, I've never seen someone converted by doing that, which maybe I
Hmm.
should hand in my pastor's license depending on who's listening. But I've also seen it
Yeah.
enough, and I've been in enough churches where that's the approach, where I'm convinced, okay, this isn't working. So that's why I
Okay.
say that I don't think it works.
So do you want to? So then at this point, do you just want to jump in? Because I think it's a really good launching point, and then I want to take on a couple of these points right here.
Yeah.
Do you just want to jump into why the Old Testament model is the preferred model then, or why you would use that,
Um.
or do you want to save that?
Yeah, I'll save
That's
it.
up to
Why
you.
don't
Okay.
you? Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. All right, man. I just don't want to cut you
And
off.
I just want to say to those listening, like, we really did not plan a lot of this ahead of time,
Nope.
so I have no idea where Jordan's going right now. So
So it's either going to be really good or really bad. Probably the latter, but we'll try. Uh, so we had this conversation a little bit over text though. So let's be a little, just kind of give it the rundown. You texted this to me, and I sat on it for like 4 days, and then I
yeah,
responded. Uh, but then we decided we are going to do it in the podcast. So we stopped talking about it. So we only know a little bit of what the other person's going to say. Uh, so Ben, I hear everything that you said, and there are some things that I think you have a good analysis on, and there's a couple things that I really think make a big difference. So I'm going to nuance. So uh,
okay.
let me start with the interpretation of the Old Testament, and the second part is I'm going to talk about.
New Testament,
Yeah,
you
did I say
mean?
old? I'm sorry, I'm just saying
Okay.
new.
Yeah.
With the NT, not to be confused with the scholar for the NT right, but the New Testament. And then I'm going to jump in on the second part of that, and I want to talk about like our culture real quick, and like
Okay.
the culture of evangelicalism and conversions and stuff. All right, first things first. I I don't know if I love the interpretation of the New Testament as strictly preaching revivals or like apologetic. Like those are the dramatic scenes in Acts, and those are the dramatic scenes that you see like in Peter, and like Paul definitely, like those things did happen, right? Like they definitely happened, but like Also, Paul and some of the scholarship and some of our history and our archaeology tell us it's not exactly what they did, and that's not what caused the church to thrive. What caused it to thrive was actually their community action, which you may talk a little bit more about in your Old Testament examples. I don't know, but they got involved and like met needs of people and used their character as the main apologetic, so to speak, if we're going to use that language, or rather than their words, and then they brought them in. Now, I also don't think that there is evidence that we can say definitively outside of those specific gospel, like those specific New Testament stories like Paul and Acts, that indicate that they were trying to have the same transformational experience that we try to do here in the United States in our evangelicalism, which I'll get to in a minute. I
Okay.
just don't know if I think that's exactly how it went down, for a couple different reasons. The first one, this was a actively laughed at, and it was definitely not an intellectually viable idea. It wasn't. Like it
Hmm.
was new, it was fresh. Uh,
You're talking about the
I'm talking
gospel
about the
in
gospel
the
message, right? The gospel message.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right.
Let me be
Like it
clear.
back in the New Testament.
Exactly. I'm trying to put it in the
Okay.
time period. So I'm not talking about a specific example within the book. I'm talking about the
Okay.
culture around the books that it's happening in. Um, so my first disagreement is that I don't think that's exactly how it happened. I think the evidence on the outside of the biblical, of like the New Testament, shows us that the church was a different kind of active, the early church.
Hmm.
But let's go back a couple minutes before that and just say, like, I also don't agree with the interpretation that even then, if they did bring people in, it was for a transformational experience like we do here in the United States. I would say that's a more 21st century phenomenon that came out of, well, not even a 21st century, a more modern phenomenon that came out of like the rise of like the Great Awakening, but more so, it's there's a reason that they call us evangelicals. And if you do a study on evangelicals, the way we go about faith is that born again experience. Like every like sociologist says that. Like that's an emphatic point for us. So I think what I'm saying is that I think that we eisegete that into the text.
Hmm.
I don't think that the New Testament is saying that's what happened. Like doubting Thomas is not a believer, and then he is by literally just like Jesus goes like this and says, "Touch me here and here." You know what I mean? But like he
Hmm.
doesn't have a moment where he like cries. Like he's like, "You're Lord," but it's like a really casual conversation if you think about it. Like he's like, "I don't believe you
Well,
guys. He didn't come back." Well, I don't know. Maybe you disagree with
well, he
that,
kinda
but
does. He
uh,
kinda has that moment
I don't
where he's
know.
like, "Oh, my lord and my god,"
Yeah, well, no, he
after he
is like
touches his
he acknowledges him responding to the evidence. The question is like, what kind of my Lord and my God is it? Is it just like my Lord and my God because you've shown me this, it's true, or are
Hmm.
we like trying to put some kind of like retroactive psychoanalysis on it, being like, he gets on his hands and
Oh, I
knees and a
see.
light shines down, my Lord, my God. No, that's definitely Saul's
I see.
experience.
Yeah.
Like there's no argument for that, or even the stories for Peter. But like, what about all
Mhm.
these other characters that we don't know that have what we would consider boring testimonies?
Hmm. So, just so I'm understanding, using the Thomas as an example, what you're saying is, yes, there's obviously something that happened there, but we tend to impose what we assume happened there. Like we assume that that was a conversion experience for Thomas when the text maybe implies that, but it's not really clear. We just assume that's what happened. Is that what you're saying? Or
I
am I
would say that it
misunderstanding?
was a conversion experience. No, no, you don't. You're not.
Okay.
I'm not clear. So I'm glad that you brought that up. What I'm arguing is that the conversion experience that we talk about as evangelicals, which you touched on, which is that emotional moment, the altar call, the cry, the hands
Hmm.
and feet moment, that like total brokenness moment. Uh, what I'm saying is that that is not the only form of conversion,
Oh, I
and I
see.
think that
Yeah.
we as evangelicals put that on a like an idolatrous pedestal almost.
Hmm.
Like if you're a Catholic person, like that's really foreign, and yet that's like the most established like kind of church in the world. Like, and I don't mean that to be crazy because like it's part of a community. You join the community of the church. Like it's
Hmm.
not like you don't join through like a moment. Like you go to the sacraments because they're part of the sacred acts, and it's in there's a little bit more there. I don't want to get too much into Catholic theology because I don't think it's relevant. But my point is like in evangelicalism, like the whole thing is like, hey, have that moment, come to Jesus, literally come to Jesus, cry, get baptized. That's also when the Holy Spirit descends, and boom, you're good, man. Like you're cruising. And I just don't think that's an accurate depiction of how the New Testament would have approached the issue. I think that's how
Hmm.
we as like modern like Westerners post romanticism with the rise of churches, and this is not a knock on this guy because we both love him, but John Wesley type figures who were romantics, who really like were rejecting that modernism of hard intellectualism. You know what I mean? Like they were going into that emotional feel it side, right? Like it's the truth that I feel in me. Like they were pushing
Hmm.
that narrative. So we have that go on. And then in the United States in particular for like Billy Graham, like they're coming out of like a really, really weird period of time in US history. So like the 60s to the 80s was a unique period of time because you have like the sexual and like revolution and like the work revolution of women's rights, and along with that the rise of American conservatism, if we're getting really specific. And my whole argument with that is that like I think what we're doing is we're taking our context and how we understand conversion because of our own cultural background, our own historical thing, and we're posing it on the
Hmm.
text. I think the text is a little different, and yes, those examples happen, so I don't want to invalidate that as an experience. I'm just simply just arguing that it's not the say all be all. So to critique, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to critique the New Testament and saying like that apologetics method isn't like, is the New Testament model like, to say the New Testament model isn't working for me is kind of like saying like, well, I guess you're not attacking the Old Testament, the New Testament to me. I'm sorry, because like for me, you're attacking like our understanding of the New Testament rather than what the text itself is trying to communicate. Does that make any sense? Like I think I got that out, but it took a long
Yeah.
time.
No, that was really good. And I don't know if I would disagree with that. I think you're right. I think what makes me uncomfortable the most is maybe not necessarily what the New Testament teaches as evangelism, but how we interpret the New Testament evangelism to be. And yeah,
Yeah.
like I would, if that's accurate, then I would certainly agree with that. Because yeah, definitely. So the way this sort of came about for me and why this topic came up is relevant to our
Okay.
discussion actually, because I'm getting ready to teach a class that's called Declaring the Gospel of God, and I was looking through the materials because it's provided
The
by the
language of the
denomination.
class, the title of the class is like sets you
Yeah,
up. Sorry.
it does. And I was looking through the notes and I was surprised. I'm like, there's almost nothing Old Testament here. No, I didn't look line by line. So maybe there's some people out there that could correct me on this. And don't just take my word for it because I could be wrong. But the way I was reading it, what really seemed to be there was just the New Testament is the model that we need to look to. And it definitely seemed to be more of the proclamation style evangelism. So, for example, a couple of the
Mm,
sections we're talking about how Jesus does evangelism, how Paul does evangelism, and the way different sections were framed were it would start off with discussion questions, and most of those questions were based around either how we integrate apologetics or how we integrate proclamation, because I do think those are a little different.
interesting.
And so it got me a little frustrated because I'm like, this is like a very specific style of evangelism, and I just don't feel this is very relevant right now for where we are as a culture. And so I was going through the process of sort of reorganizing it in a different way and uh, integrating Old Testament style of what I would consider evangelism. And so that's where this conversation came from. But I bring all that up to say, I think you're right. I think I'm more responding to a certain type of interpretation of New Testament style evangelism.
Well, I'm fine jumping in on that train, and we can, because I mean, like, we still may not, because we don't really know, we still may not agree on like how that works. Because like, there's some like, I will defend some viability of the model,
Mm,
but I'll nuance it. I think, I don't know. It's up to you, man.
yeah, I mean, I
This is the
think
problem with
apologetics are good.
going in blind.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I do think apologetics are good. I do think proclamation is good, but I feel like those are more effective within the community of faith, um, more often than not. I mean, I think in terms of what your goal is, right? If your goal for apologetics is to simply discuss the legitimacy and the reason the reasonableness of the faith, I think that's fine. If your approach to proclamation, which is more of a preaching, again, Billy Graham style, is more to articulate maybe the theology and the underlying beliefs of the church, then I think that's fine. But if your goal is to use apologetics and proclamation for the purpose of converting someone, I just I don't think that works in our culture. So maybe I'm more responding to that, of using those as a tool of conversion rather than using them as, you know, instruction or articulation. Um, because I mean, I
Okay.
haven't thought about
Okay.
that. Do you think there's a difference there? Like, does that flow? Does Am I making sense?
No, it does. It does. No, but like, okay, so this is going to get really, really, really high level. And I mean like
Okay.
specific too. Actually, not high level, like detailed. So like kind
Okay.
of what we're almost debating right now, and tell me if this makes sense to you, is like literally like this sounds crazy. The moment, like the spatio-temporal moment for conversion to Christian theism, like, you know what I mean?
Mm,
Which is just an absurdist kind of like, if you think about it, like it's a, you know what I mean? Like, just it doesn't. It's kind of like Zeno's paradox. You know what I mean? Like, if you always go halfway, like you can always get closer to the moment, but you're never. Like, you're always closer to the other wall, but you can never really arrive. So, like,
yeah.
how close of seconds can we get on this? I guess, or like, what is the exact
Hmm.
moment one is a Christian? And that's a joke, but it's also a point that I'm trying to make. That like, maybe we need to change our discussion a little bit. But no, I don't think you're off. I really don't. I don't think you're off. Like, all right, so I don't, because I think we'll agree. Like, so really, what I want to ultimately argue is that the biggest Christian apologetic isn't necessarily, and because I think I know where you're going to go with the OT model, I want to hear it before I go too far in. But I'll just tip my hat a little bit, or tip my hand, or whatever the you know
Yeah.
whatever the phrase is. Anyway, I'll do it. My thing is, like, I think that the first step, that and the most important step that Christians ought to take, is to try to create a culture within the countries and the places, the states, the cities, the whatever, the towns, homes that you live in, for your faith being not only viable but true. So that means two things for me. That means, one, like, it's actual viable as an intellectual option. That means you're not saying stupid stuff. Uh, you know what I mean? Like, I
Mm,
know people talk about like how cults. Well, actually, no, it's a big thing in our culture. We got a bunch of documentaries going popular about these cults right now. Uh,
mhm,
and like people talk a lot about cults and like the cult recruiting model, and they'll get these people to believe like absolutely nutso stuff. Like, think about like Heaven's Gate. Have you heard about Heaven's Gate?
mhm,
Yeah, so you know what I mean? Like that, like a spaceship's gonna take them back. They literally like drank Kool, like, you know what I mean? They died. They killed themselves. They didn't drink Kool-Aid. That was Jim Jones. But like, you know what I mean? Like that's so crazy. Like, how do you get there? And like, by all accounts, before this cult got a hold of them, these people were pretty normal people. They were just looking for something,
mhm.
you know. And I just think that churches ought to be careful not to co-brand themselves in that camp, because I think that's gonna
Yeah.
lose some like cultural respectability. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we like the whole model of like incorporate community first, teach after. I just really don't like. Having said that, you're not wrong. Like, the whole like you have to ascribe to this doctrine and buy this product before you jump in doesn't make a lot of sense either. But I think part of the problem there is a cultural problem that we have, that like we haven't done a good job in general in public and the public spaces of representing Christianity. You know, we kind of talked about this yesterday in our just personal conversations, like the Ken Ham stuff. You know, Ken Ham's
Mhm.
like, hey, the solution to fixing church people leaving the church is to give them more right answers. Well, no, especially not your right answers in particular, but definitely not. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. Like, sorry, if you're a Kid Ham fan, you're probably not going to enjoy the rest of this. This isn't going to end well for him, between me and him. Anyway, my whole thing is this: that like we got to like make it culturally like viable. Like, hey, when we say something, we do. And the second part, so like that's like the intellectual, like the academic, like, but like the real, like, hey, be careful how you say and what you say about the kingdom and how you interpret the Old New Testament, and like what you say about the Bible. Like, be clear and be specific. Don't just come up with like this stuff out of left field. Like, check with people. That's important. That's a big deal. That's why we started the podcast, because that was a problem to us to some extent, or at least to me. The second part of
Yeah.
that is I probably the more important part, to be honest with you. It's the character aspect. Just not be hypocritical. I
Hmm.
literally don't need to say anything else. Like, just don't be a hypocrite. I don't know. I don't know how to say that, Pim. Like just be consistent. So like my whole thing, man, and like, just because I know that I said a lot and I went a lot of different places, but like my whole thing is like, if we create a culture where like Christians had some trust in the world, like,
Hmm.
you have the respectability and the flexibility to have that conversion moment and to make it fine. But you also give yourself the room to just join the community, because you already know, because we're representing ourselves. You know, we're ambassadors for Christ. We're doing a good job representing ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it
I probably
does.
just butchered
So
Paul, but that's fine. It's Speaking of
Nah, it's
hypocrites.
fine. Yeah. So
Sorry.
so it sounds like we're both disagreeing a little bit with the style of evangelism that's based on proclamation or apologetics. So, I mean,
I guess it
I'm
depends on
very
what
much
kind.
summarizing what you're saying, but
I would say it depends on what kind, but yeah, as a broad stroke, for sure, for sure.
yeah. Well, I guess okay. So picture like revival sessions, and that's what I'm trying to
I don't,
articulate,
I
just
don't
using
think in the
different
long
words.
run revivals are a successful model for bringing people into church. Yes, I 100% am down with that.
Okay. Although that does tend to be the model that a lot of churches want to uh, practice in some way. I mean, even if it's just dressing it up, right?
Yeah,
Like, oh, let's modernize it with video clips and music and all this stuff, and then maybe we'll get some conversion out of it. That's still revival style approach. Which, now that I think about it, makes me wonder, like, so there is this Christian music festival called Winter Jam. I think they still do it. I don't know. I haven't been to it in a long time. It almost feels like, okay, so I went to one time. Maybe this was just my experience, but it was really odd because towards the end of the concert, this guy comes out and he gives like this little miniature sermon, and then there's like a call to uh like be born again, like a call to conversion. And I remember sitting there and I just felt so uncomfortable all of a sudden. And like I was already Christian and I was like, this is weird. Because then the whole thing ended up feeling like just a big revival moment. Like the whole thing was geared towards that. So it was just very strange. But even there, I might say, even that could, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. Maybe what I'm trying to say is the revival style of evangelism is so ingrained in how American Christians think that we tend to assume that no matter what
I
we
agree.
do, we have to integrate that into what we're doing. Even if it's just a music concert, we have to create a revival moment almost. And it's very strange.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's not a Christian event if you don't offer the moment for like, hey, come on down and join the club. Come on
Yeah.
down. That's such a mean. I didn't mean that to be like mean. Like, but come on down and try to like because what they're really trying to get you to do is experience the grace and power of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
What they're not actually doing is like explaining it, or at least in a way that would make sense to an outsider, the person that you're trying to bring in, explain it. So I don't know. I don't know. I think we're in agreement on that one for sure.
Yeah. And it's not like we think anyone has bad intentions when this happens. It's just like, is this effective anymore for the amount of effort it takes? Probably not. And it's just sort of awkward and cringy when it happens. Let's be honest. Like
Yeah.
even I cringe at it. It's just like, yeah. If I wasn't a Christian, I wouldn't respond to this.
Yeah,
Like,
well, because you don't have a like. I
yeah,
think the thing is that you're pointing out is that like sometimes and this is just a Christian cultural problem. That is, I talk a lot about
yeah.
cultural problems. I need to stop. But thanks, Ben. That was nice shrug. I appreciate it. Sorry, the podcast listeners are like, what shrug? I couldn't hear that. Just know the silence was Ben being like, whatever. Anyway, like the thing that I think is really interesting and that I find fascinating is that like Christians tend to like just get a little complacent. I don't mean that in a bad way. We talk about that in churches, but like, if we only did more of these things and it's all the stuff that they used to do that they're still
Hmm.
kind of doing, that's not doing as much, but it's still not really working. Like, you know, that to me is just like applying a band-aid on a wound. Like, I mean, it's gonna maybe stop some bleeding, but like you probably need some stitches, dude. Like, you need something, you need a
Yeah.
different, more intense approach. And I think that's really what we're arguing, right? Like kind of is that really are
Yeah.
we both on the same page in that sense?
Yeah. And like you need something a little bit more real. Like when you're saying that, it made me think specifically of like a lot of Christian movies. They
Oh,
really tend to operate off of this like a lot of
I
these
died a
ideas.
little
For
inside.
one, you need a conversion moment, which I'm not bashing conversion. I'm just saying the way that they structure it. You need a conversion moment, and you also need to present the idea that when someone converts to Christianity and accepts Jesus Christ, like everything just magically works out. Like God's not dead. The first one and also the second one are great examples of this. And
Can we talk about the first
I've
one in a
mentioned him
minute?
before. I'm gonna plug him again. Say goodnight, Kevin. He does a great job critiquing those movies, and he's also very much articulate of the idea that this does not work, and it's a false representation of Christianity. But for some reason, we feel like we have to present it that way. Like if you come to Christ, then just everything in your life ends up working out. Like yes, there is peace, there is joy, but that doesn't mean that just suddenly all your problems are fixed. Like it's different than that. And Christian media sucks at
Telling the
actually
truth.
talking about it. Yeah, pretty much.
It's so you know what's really interesting, man. So like, all right, my small group. This is not a debate anymore. This is just a fun conversation. So I guess we're just pivoting. I don't know, but I'm going to
Okay.
say it anyway because I think it's relevant. Sorry, Ben. We can get back to the debate. But my aunt, I said this before. She's a C.S. Lewis scholar. Like that's her thing. She taught English
Mhm.
at Taylor University in Indiana, up in Upland, and then she taught the Fort Wayne campus. Did her thesis on C.S. Lewis. She's even been to the C.S. Lewis conference in Oxford. I think she presented once. I'd have to double check that with
Wow.
her. But anyway, that's her jam. Like she knows C.S. Lewis. So my small group is reading Mere Christianity. So for prep, I just said, hey, Aunt Pam, would you give me some details on C.S. Lewis? Can we talk about like Mere Christianity? And one of the things she said, like right off the bat about the book, she goes, the point of this book is that like C.S. Lewis had a legitimate critique that he consistently leveled in a lot of his literature, which is exactly what you just said, is that Christianity as practice is a bit weak. In particular, right, it doesn't communicate the real costs or the real truths of Christianity. Instead, like we
Mhm.
paint it in rosy pictures. So like, and he's writing this like around World War One, you know, so like that's a way before like the Billy Graham stuff. So it's been a long term problem. I really want to
Mhm.
say that like we're so willing to like it's like we're bad salesmen. It's like hey, it's kind of like a Ponzi scheme. You want to if you buy it, you get in early, get all your money back plus interest. Like it's not how that works. Like I mean, what does Jesus say? Like take up your cross and follow me. You know,
Mhm.
my yoke is light. It's still a yoke. You know what I mean? Like it's not
Yeah.
exactly like a pillow. Things heavy,
Hmm.
like that kind of stuff. Like it costs something and means something. Like grace isn't like what is Jake? We need Jake Gregory on the pod. What does Jake Gregory always
For
say?
real.
Don't cheapen grace. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So shout out to Jake
Yeah.
Gregory. You're that actually Jake, a personal level because I know you're listening. That quote really really changed my life in a positive way. So when you come on the pod, I'll share that story. But yeah, come on the pod. That's my plug for Jake because I know he listens and it's awesome. But anyway, we need Jake on the pod. But like grace isn't cheap, right? Like it's not. And if we cheapen it, then we're really short selling the power of it and like the real value. Does that make any sense? I feel like I just went way off out of left.
No, it does. But let me tie it back to our discussion on New Testament versus Old
Man, you're good.
Testament. I feel like the idea of cheap grace tends to be articulated through the use of the stories of Jesus and his healing miracles.
Mm,
And we say, once you come to know Christ, like you can experience this too. Not that you can't. It's not to say that those things don't happen, but we use that as like a reference point of being like, see, like these lives were changed for the better. Like if you're sick, you can be healed because that's what Jesus does when you give your life to him. And in that way, I think we cheapen grace because we
pseudo
assume
prosperity
that when Jesus did those things, like, oh, that's what evangelism is supposed to look like is when you have that moment, then this is the type of thing that happens. Um, so maybe that's another
well,
critique
bringing it back to the
of the
gospel
church
account.
using. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
you're right. You're really spot on. Like another like kind of poke a hole in that a little bit, which I agree with you. Like, like look at the disciples. Like they like literally left everything, like their careers, maybe families, to
Hmm.
like follow Jesus. They followed this dude around for like 2 years, or 3 years. Wow, math is hard. It's really,
It's
really
okay. Well,
hard.
some scholars are nowadays saying that it might have been just 1 year, so who knows?
Yeah. Either
One
way,
year, 2 year, 3 years, whatever,
for an
somewhere in there.
extended period of time that you probably wouldn't be able to just like drop your occupation or like your family, you know what I mean? Like it's an extended period of time. The
Yeah.
point remains, right? Either way, but the whole point is this: that they do this thing, they see all these things, they acknowledge him as Lord, and then they watch him die. Now, luckily, they get to see him as a resurrected body. Like they actually get to see him as a resurrected person, become a Christian. Like they become like the first Christians, right? But the rest of their lives really weren't all that great if you think about it. Because not only did they have to like basically walk around living from donations, like almost basically poverty, with Jesus during that period, then they watched them die, and then he came back, hung out for like 40 days, and was like, all right, I gotta get going, peace out. And then he's like, hey, go build my church. And they're like, awesome. So they keep doing the same thing he did. And I'm saying this playfully, but like I want to kind of illustrate like how absurd it is to think that everything gets better in a material way, because they basically probably ran around in poverty. They eventually got persecuted. Most of them were crucified or murdered in some form or another. And like, like it
Yeah.
doesn't, like Paul was in prison for a majority of his life. Like, like it's not a good thing. Like, you don't become a Christian like, rainbows and butterflies and roses. You don't ride around on a unicorn. Like, it's a little bit worse. It's more like a trip to the safari without the jeep. Just you running around a
Yeah.
bunch of months of lions and trying not to die. Um, Sorry,
True.
that got dark, but it's true. It's the cost. Sorry,
Yeah.
world's worst safari trip.